Choosing an advisor is one of the most important decisions you can make when you're starting a PhD program. One of the first things that you can look at when choosing an advisor is their rank. Are they an assistant professor? Are they an associate professor? Are they a full professor? What rank a professor is in often dictates the things that they focus on and what their research agenda looks like. Assistant professors, for example, are mostly focused on getting tenure. That can be a good thing. Often what that means is that they're very research productive, are focused on getting a lot of publications out, and can also be focused on getting a number of grants out as well. One of the drawbacks is experience. Assistant professors haven't been doing it for that long. They're just getting their agenda in their lab started up, or they're farther along and they're really thinking about what they're doing pre-tenure. All of that is fine, but what it also means is that they might not have that much experience advising graduate students. They also might not have a large professional network compared to their peers who are associate or full professors. Associate professors often already have tenure, and this has a couple of implications. One, they're not as pressured to produce as much as quickly as their pre-tenure colleagues. Sometimes they take their time to really establish their research agenda or establish a new direction. This freedom to explore new directions often has unintended downstream implications for graduate students. Sometimes it means that they're not going to work on as many projects. On the good side, because they're already tenured, they have a vast network of folks that they know and they can connect you with. They have more experience doing research and doing research successfully, so you might be able to pick up a few more things than someone who's more junior, like an assistant professor. Full professors are the most established professor. They've already gotten tenure, they've been promoted from associate to full, and what that entitles them is more time and more freedom to really develop themselves and their research agenda in ways that are innovative and in ways that aren't necessarily pressured by external factors. Full professors are often the most experienced when it comes to a number of things. They've probably done more research than their assistant or associate colleagues. They've probably graduated and advised more graduate students. Full professors might have less bandwidth overall, but they also might have more capacity. It really depends. How visible is your potential new advisor? When I say visibility, I mean visible in the field, I mean visible potentially nationally or regionally. Basically, who knows them and what do they know about them? The highly visible advisor, for example, might be flying to give talks all over the country. They might be interviewed by a number of news outlets, and that's great. It's great for you because you get to learn from someone who's very well established and well known, but it can mean that there might not be that much time to actually work with them. Someone who's less visible might not be flying all over the country to do those things, and they might actually have more time in the lab and they might be around more. Sometimes high visibility is great when it comes to networking and future opportunities, but it might not be as great when it comes to actually doing the work that will train you. What sort of expertise does your potential new advisor have? How do they do their work? Even within a discipline, and even within a sub-discipline, all of us do work a specific way. Although many of us aren't focused on making clones of ourselves when we actually mentor graduate students, that doesn't mean that we don't impart similar patterns of behavior, similar patterns of research. We know how to do work a certain way, our way, and that's the way that we train graduate students. So make sure that when you're thinking about a potential new advisor, you have a feel for what their expertise is like, because that's the sort of expertise that you will be developing. Perhaps one of the most important things that you should think about is the current research agenda of your potential new advisor. And I emphasize the word current here. We all have a long research agenda. There's stuff I worked on 10 years ago that I'm sure someone fell in love with. I doubt it because my work isn't that exciting, and at least not exciting enough to fall in love with. However, we all have this history of research that we've done. As a graduate student, you're not going to really work on stuff that I've finished or that your potential new advisor has finished. Instead, you're going to be working on what's next, what's new. So it's important for you to have a feel for what the current research agenda of your potential new advisor is. That'll really help you know where you're going. And that may be different than what they're known for. How am I funded? This is a very important question because it has implications. Most PhDs in the United States are funded positions. So that means that you'll be getting a free degree and you'll have some funding to pay you a stipend for your cost of living. Where the money comes from matters. Not so much because money's different depending on where it's coming from, it just matters in terms of where you'll be spending your time. If you're funded through an external grant, for example, that's the work you'll be doing. You'll become intimately familiar with the project that grant is supporting. If you're on a fellowship, however, sometimes that means that you have more freedom. You have more freedom to work on other things that aren't necessarily tied to a specific project. How many graduate students do you currently advise? This is important for a couple of reasons. One, the more graduate students, the more peers you'll have. Second, the more graduate students, chances are the less time your PI might have or your advisor might have. That's not necessarily always the case, but think of each additional graduate student both in terms of what you gain from them and also resources that might have to be divided up a little bit differently because they're supporting more people. What's your advising style? Every single one of us has their own advising style. Some of us are more laissez-faire, where we expect the student to take more of an initiative. Others micromanage their students more and are really task-oriented and really make sure that their students are on task when it comes to a specific thing. Chances are, whoever you're thinking about for an advisor won't be at either extreme. There'll be a mix of the two. So understand what they're laissez-faire about and what they're more micromanagey about. That'll give you a feel for whether or not you can work with them. Which project are you excited about? It sounds like a simple thing, but often it's good to engage your potential advisor in whatever they're thinking about for work. This will give you a feel for what they're excited about, obviously, but also how they're excited about it, which questions they're asking, and you might get into a fun conversation where you help them think through something, or something you say triggers another line of thought. May I speak to your current students? It's important to know what the current students are up to. This gives you a feel for any red flags that might be there, any green flags, and just gives you another perspective into the person that you'll be working with for a few years. So it's important for you to speak to others who have worked with them closely. How do you like to communicate feedback? This is an important thing for every graduate student to know, because feedback is essential to become a successful graduate student. However, how they communicate feedback is important. Sometimes it'll be a conversation. Sometimes feedback will be written. Sometimes that feedback will be short but direct. Other times it'll be a little bit longer and a little bit more indirect. Understanding how your advisor communicates that feedback is important because at this point you should know how you like to receive feedback. So if there's already a dissonance or a disconnect, maybe they like being direct and you don't like direct feedback, then you can potentially anticipate some issues. That doesn't mean it's a deal breaker. None of what I said is a deal breaker because it's about fit, frankly. But it still gives you a sense of things that you should be mindful of when you're thinking about potentially working with someone. Are you planning to leave? There's lots of different ways to ask this question, but it's an important question. Faculty move around. Sometimes they take another position before you even get there, or sometimes they'll take a position within a couple of years. Know that they don't have to answer this question, but it's still a good question to potentially ask because one of the worst things that can happen is you start a program and then your advisor leaves. That puts you in a very tricky position. Puts everyone in a tricky position, frankly. So it's a question that you can ask. It's a question that I asked my potential advisor when I was applying to graduate school. Here's some closing thoughts that I think might be helpful. The first is this idea that relationships change. So whatever interaction you have, whatever opportunity you have to speak with a potential advisor, that's not the end of the relationship. In fact, that could be the beginning. The advisor-advisee relationship is at least the duration of the program, and often years beyond that. So it's important for you to know that a relationship could change and to be okay with that, to not expect a person to be static. We're all multidimensional. So understanding that your potential advisor could also change because they're living their life, that'll help you understand where they're coming from a little bit more and will help you see the relationship as something organic that could grow or shrink, frankly, but something nonetheless that isn't static and stagnant. You will also change. Remember, PhDs are anywhere from 4 to 7, sometimes 8 years. It shouldn't be 8. It can be a problem when they're 8. I got married during my PhD program, for example. That didn't fundamentally change me, but however, it did change parts of my life. I also got a cat, which was slightly different, but still, it's still life that happens. So understanding that you will change and that you will be in a position to change with your advisor is important because again, it's a relationship, it's organic. The relationship you have with them will likely last beyond graduate school. That doesn't mean that you'll become friends with them after graduate school, but it does mean that the relationship doesn't end at the end of your PhD. You might see them at a reception. You might ask them for a letter of recommendation. It's a relationship that could frankly last your entire professional life. And that's kind of fun. So what do you think? What are some questions that you would ask your potential new advisor to have a better understanding of whether or not you could work well with them?